Hi, I'm Nate Nelson, Managing Director for the LA office of ADAPTOVATE. Thank you again for joining us to discuss an important topic, applying agile ways of working to gain efficiencies and cut costs. We have a fantastic panel today made up of senior leaders from Australia and the US. Over the next 20 minutes, I will be asking the panel questions and they will respond with their perspectives and real life examples. But first, I'd like to introduce our panel. Alex Rekowski is a co-founder and partner of ADAPTOVATE. While he works out of our Sydney office, he has been instrumental in supporting clients across the globe in large, complex, agile transformations in industries such as financial services, insurance, and many others. Next up, I'd like to introduce Chelsea Bates. Chelsea is a principal and managing director of our Melbourne office. She has been with ADAPTOVATE for 2 years, and prior to joining, she has held leadership positions with ThoughtWorks as well as KPMG. And Chelsea and her Melbourne team have supported clients in the US, Europe, Singapore, as well as Australia. And finally, Alan Trivedi. And Alan is a principal in our LA office with deep experience in agile transformation and leadership development. In fact, Alan is a published author and leads our largest clients in the US. Thank you all for joining. It's great to have you on the panel.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nate.
All right, well, let's go ahead and jump right in. So the first question, and I'll ask Alex if he might take a stab at this one. When most people hear the word agile, they might think it's only applicable for tech companies. Can you give us a couple of examples of how we applied agile ways of working to non-tech companies to gain efficiencies and cut costs?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nate. So look, I almost want to say that, you know, we do specialize in more the non-tech companies rather than the tech companies. But I think that two examples that come to my mind is one is actually a mining company where we helped out to save approximately 15 to 20% of cost in the head office and the corporate functions. Now the goal there was to actually ensure that we not only do a traditional cost-cutting exercise where you go into spans and layers, but actually look at the work that they're doing. So we've done a series of workshops to identify how that work might change and actually how are we improving and taking away the amount of work that people are doing that. And that's very powerful because not only, you know, the traditional cost-cutting exercises usually happen in an Excel sheet. Here you're actually using some of the agile tools and processes and practices to work with the teams to understand what work they do and how you can streamline that. And that has been a great success. So they've actually received, realized those benefits and have been able, you know, now it's we're about a year and a half after that transformation, and they are able to sustain the cost base. Which is one of the amazing things. But that's one example of what how we apply that. The second example that I wanted to give is actually with an airline. I know it's a tough time for airlines at the moment, obviously, but this was an exercise actually within the sales and marketing teams. Where we've applied agile ways of working to streamline their campaign process. And not only, it resulted in significantly lower cost of running the campaigns, but also increase quite drastically the speed to market. So, the campaigns that would take them previously somewhere around 3 months to prepare and run, we were able to do in 6 weeks. So cutting that time to half, again using mostly the agile principles and you know, allowing the people that, you know, creating a cross-functional team that then, you know, knows exactly what the challenge is, which has been, you know, absolutely great.
Great. And, you know, you've really sort of touched on a couple of key points here on, I guess, my next question. One is, you know, the ability to sustain the results. And two is in some ways sort of meeting clients where they're at, right? And whether that's, you know, being impacted by the industry or just where they're at on their journey. So I guess my second question is, you know, do companies need to be agile already to begin to implement this approach to cost cutting, or can they start from where they are today?
So I've got some great examples where you really can start at any point and still realize tangible business benefits. If you've got agile teams, scaling across the organization can help reduce some of those organizational constraints the teams are facing into. So there's, you know, significant cost benefits there. Or another example, we helped a consumer wealth organization, the product team last year. They'd never done agile in product while tech was using agile ways of working. What we helped them do was realize an increase in revenue plus a significant decrease in costs in the back office by putting the customer at the center and taking a customer lens, and then helping them use agile ways of working to deliver. So they also then not only realized revenue increases and reduced costs, they also delivered it in 7 months compared to what they thought was an ambitious time frame of 12. And so helping them with lots of testing and learning and adapting based on the new information, and really focusing on iterative delivery. So not sort of delivering it at the end, but focusing on delivering value consistently throughout that 7 months.
Thanks, Chelsea. And I guess to, you know, just to sort of use that as a jumping off point, you know, we're talking about longer term efficiencies. And you know, if you could think of perhaps another example or two, and maybe this is a good question for Alan. I mean, when we think about cost cutting or efficiency, capturing efficiencies over time, how do you sort of drive that into the organization from a longer term perspective?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thanks for that, Nate. You know, so we're working right now with a global energy client, and they're trying to do just that. You know, they're going through a transformation right now. They're going through significant cost cutting. The challenge for them is to continue to deliver value despite this reduction of resources. And so in working with Agile ways, we're helping them to improve efficiencies really in 3 ways. The first one is really creating a greater focus on value. One way we're doing this is cascading aspirational and measurable outcomes throughout the organization. This really helps to set an understanding of what value looks like at an individual, a project, a business unit, at organizational level. The second part is on really breaking down the silos. This really means building cross-functional teams, smaller teams with greater focus, and pulling in senior leaders to offer continuous feedback and improve decision-making. The third part is fostering a learning and improvement culture, right? So together we build communities of practice through coaching and teaching and mentoring. And these communities of practice help us to scale faster and ensure that all the changes we've implemented are sustainable.
My next question is around management structures. We know that in traditional management structures, decisions can take longer, and there's more of a challenge around accountability. What are some behaviors and practices that management would need to display in order to adopt the Agile cost-cutting approach effectively?
Nate, happy to take that question. Thanks. Look, I think what happens is at the end of the day, Agile for in business or in you know, with leadership teams, it's really, there should be 2 objectives that they're trying to achieve. One is to create alignment for their teams, which is really understand or let them understand what is it that we're trying to achieve as an organization. And the second is that which is an outcome of creating that alignment, is it creates autonomy for the teams. And I think this is probably, I would say, the most challenging things that we see management teams trying to achieve while going through an agile transformation. So because it's, so Alan mentioned in the previous question, you know, the need to cascade outcomes clearly to the teams. In order to do that, you need to be clear as a management team what those outcomes mean, which means that you yourself need to adopt a mindset of, you know, collaboration, transparency, and very often some innovation as well. So that's kind of the one aspect. The second aspect is, you know, how do you change your behaviors in order to empower the team? So I have talked to one of the executives at one of the largest banks in Europe, and you know, I've asked him a question. So they went through an agile transformation, and I asked a question: how does your world changed after the agile transformation? And he said it changed completely. You know, I used to have an office with a meeting room, and everyone used to come to me and ask me for decisions. Now I spend time actually going to the teams, talking with the teams, and then providing them the guidance and the guide rails. But I'm not making the decisions. It's them who are making the decisions. And what that does is it speeds up the delivery, and it makes them more efficient, which is absolutely great. And I think that kind of summarizes, you know, the journey that the management team also needs to go through, and also in the cost-cutting exercises, right? So this is all about, as I said previously, it's not about doing an Excel sheet and taking all the decisions, but actually working with the teams to identify how can we do things in a different way, right? How can we, and how can you, because you're the closest as the team, you're the closest to the work, how can you think about it? How can you make those decisions? It's not, it's a lot less about the decisions with the management team.
I think to that point as well, particularly in some of the government departments I've worked with, we're asking people to make decisions with less information, but making smaller decisions as opposed to decisions that might, you know, go for 1 or 2 years, the impact. It's making smaller decisions with slightly less information, but being able to adapt. And if you've come from a background maybe of being a specialist or knowing something back to front, and being asked to make decisions, smaller decisions, and being okay with that fact that that might not be 100% right because you might get some new information, that can be asking people to work very, very differently to how they've worked as managers or leaders before.
Yeah, and I think another good point there around making decisions and empowering teams, bringing senior leaders into the decision-making process more frequently also helps to empower the team significantly. So when teams feel that their senior leaders are also invested and they're also highly engaged, it allows them to also make adjustments more frequently versus seeing your senior leader 3 months down the line where you've done some work and you've got to go all the way back to the beginning and start again. So really making sure senior leaders are engaged more frequently is extremely helpful in the decision-making process.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great points. And I think that sort of leads into the question that, and Alex touched on this, and you all did really, but you know, as we think about modifications to the management structure, and you know, Alex talked about, and Chelsea and Alan for that matter, talked about speeding up the ability to make decisions. Every organization is looking to gain efficiencies and cut costs. What are some of the benefits organizations can expect if they were to pursue this approach specifically?
So we've seen organizations have significant success pretty much across the scale, from everything from reducing duplication of roles. When you've got clear alignment and you know who's working on what, not from, but from a team level, you start to see that maybe you don't need 10 of a certain thing. So reduce duplication of roles firstly. The other really good important one we see is that simplification of process. When you're putting customer at the center and taking that customer viewpoint and an end-to-end viewpoint, you start to realize that maybe you've got 10 problems downstream, but you could fix them by fixing one problem upstream. So you can really simplify the processes. And often people go into these thinking, oh, I need to digitize what I've got, but it's actually taking that look and, can we make this, I suppose using things like lean. So simplified processes would be the second one. We also find with cross-functional teams, significant amount of reduction in handovers, and handovers tend to effectively waste. Someone has to brief someone who has to brief someone else. So cross-functional teams get rid of that waste. So you've got reduced handovers. The other really important one, and Alan touched on this just before, is delivering iteratively has two clear benefits. You're sort of delivering value on a regular cadence and not value at the end. So that's not specifically cost cutting, but you are seeing that if it is revenue or cost cutting being delivered iteratively. And the other one that Alan referred to previously is you're getting feedback from your stakeholders and your customers, again, on a regular cadence. So it doesn't result in a significant amount of rework that might need to be done. Say you spent 6 months doing something. And the final one, which I think Alex referred to, is having that clear alignment from strategy and objectives to work being done. Again, can help you stop doing work, particularly in large complex organizations. You may have programs that have been running for 3 years with no tangible outcome being delivered. And it's a really good opportunity to say, well, actually, how does this align to what objectives are? So you can really focus the work and your team on what is important to the organization.
Absolutely. And if I can add here, absolutely, those are the kind of drivers that we see that help organizations there. But the other aspect of it is that when you take a little bit more of the agile approach to the cost cutting, you actually create also the ability to make a decision whether you want to, bank the benefits pretty much, or you can also think about reinvesting that, right? And with the more traditional approaches, it's usually focused on one or the other. The agile approach, being agile, actually allows you to make those adjustments as you go. So, and this is what we see with our clients when we go. We also apply the agile principles to the work that we do. So, you test and learn and see, that, cutting this type of activities might create some extra work down the line. In a traditional cost-cutting exercise, you wouldn't think about that. So the agile approach actually allows you to rebalance the activities, and therefore, again, as I said before, provide a sustainable cost base.
And one other thing to add, both Chelsea and Alex touched upon this. What's interesting is we're talking about cost cutting. One of our clients in the manufacturing space, they take a very interesting approach when we talk about low cost, right? So while in the past, what they used to do is when they look for a solution, they would play out every alternative solution that they can think of and try to understand all of them and then choose one. This type of an approach took anywhere between 1 to 1.5 years to make decisions. And so we flipped it with Agile, right? So when we implemented Agile, we said, what if we started with the lowest cost option? What would be the cheapest thing to do that would drive the highest impact? And let's add on later. It completely changed the way they thought about problems, and they thought about what was most important to them, what was most valuable to them, and how can they do it the quickest with the lowest cost. And when they did that, they reduced their time. One of the teams, I recall, took a 6-month process and were able to deliver a solution within 4 weeks. So it's absolutely fantastic when you're able to start with a bottom-up approach, looking at the immediate future and the lowest cost option.
That's great. And that is, I mean, that's a real life example. And that's a great lead into the next question around, how do companies get started? Like, what are some of the first steps that they might take if they want to look at applying agile ways of working in maybe a less traditional way, meaning outside of a technology environment to gain those longer term efficiencies and cost benefits?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a great question. Similar to that, it's really we think about this often, sometimes even in terms of like design thinking principles, right? Where we're really trying to understand of all the pain points and challenges we have, which ones are the highest impact. And so often we look at this as the least complexity and highest impact opportunities. What is the least complex to do but has the greatest impact? And really starting number one with identifying those opportunities. How can I start immediately? Number two is collecting both qualitative and quantitative data about what's happening within the organization, right? So this could be something like doing interviews, observing what's working, what's not, looking at existing processes. So as we think about qualitative data, we're thinking about aspirational changes. And when we think about the quantitative data, it allows us to really measure the outcomes, the measurable outcomes. And the third part is really establishing a plan. Now that we know what are the biggest opportunities ahead of us, and we know how we're going to collect the data that's going to help us move forward, it's establishing that roadmap and establishing that plan, and then through test and learns, continuing to deliver against those pain points and making adjustments as needed.
I second that, Alan, absolutely. And just to add to it, I think the data, collecting data and measuring is super important, because very often what we see is we work with clients that have started their journey with Agile, but what happens is very often they focus on being Agile as an outcome in itself, and that's one way of looking at it. But what our philosophy is very much about, the Agile transformation should be focused around business outcomes, and that's why the measurement and the data are so important to understand actually whether you're going in the right direction or you're not going in the right direction, and to make those adjustments as needed. Because we've seen organizations that have worked from an Agile process perspective, they've run a very tight shop, but that has not moved any dial in terms of their business outcomes, because there was no focus on those business outcomes.
Yeah, and Alex, that's a great segue into sort of the next part of it as we think about, the steps to get started, which Alan, both you and Alex provided some great perspectives. Let's say you've achieved some success, right? And you've got some momentum, and then how do you think about scaling that across the organization?
So that's a $1 million question, Nate. I think the answer is, at the end of the day, it depends. It depends on each of the organization, and our approach is actually to tailor it to each of the organization. But there are a couple of things that, when we approach it, are common. First of all, for us, really implementing Agile ways of working or new ways of working at scale is really about changing the operating model of the company. So you need to think about, not only the Agile process, as I mentioned before, but actually the whole almost ecosystem of a business. So, in our approach, we talk about 7 elements of changing into an Agile operating model, from what we talk about, how do you cascade the strategy all the way to the teams, to how do you fund teams, how do you create autonomy within the teams, through the career paths, incentives. Also, the Agile process, as we said, is important, but also, for example, how do you approach technology within your organization? So those are all the things that you actually have to think about when you're embarking on the journey to scale Agile. But as I said, it's tailored to each organization. So we always also start with an assessment to understand, what are the elements that will help with the agile transformations, and what are the elements that might be detractors and that therefore we need to change. We also work with our clients very collaboratively. So for us, it's all about delivering a sustained change. So we don't want to come back to our clients to do the same thing. We want to come back to do something new, something more exciting. So we very much pair up with the organization and with the local experts to drive that change. But look, at the end of the day, it's as with every large change, it is about knowing what you're after, what are the outcomes you're trying to deliver, measuring it, and then applying the agile principle of test and learn. That's at the end what it's all about.
Getting back to management and organizational structure, Chelsea, this question is for you. Would love to hear your thoughts and perspectives on how roles and responsibilities shift in the new model.
So I think one of the things we see is you have a very clearly defined decision maker with your product owner. And that can be different to how some maybe other teams have worked previously. So some management roles will move into that product owner roles. You'll have new roles such as Scrum Masters, and there might be existing people who can take into those roles. But actually, your teams will be different because you're going to have a cross-functional team. And so finding that right skill or that right blend of skills to deliver that outcome, which is often quite different to how teams have worked previously. And the other thing is your team's going to be more empowered because they're very, very clear on what the objective is, what they're working towards. You normally have measures of success. So they know that what they're doing is moving the needle in the right direction or not. And a more empowered autonomous team tend to be, there's a lot more transparency. You tend to get better staff morale and employee well-being from that type of thing. I think the other thing I forgot to mention is Alex spoke about it before. It's a lot more clearly defined career paths. Often you find, particularly in maybe some corporate functions, there aren't that clearly defined career paths. Moving to this new structure, all these agile ways of working, there's a clearly defined career path based around mastery.
And I think, if I can add, and I think that mastery part is very important, right? Because again, in traditional organizations, what we focus on is, in order to get promoted, you need to at some point become a manager. Very often, especially with a specialist role, which Agile puts a lot more emphasis on within the team. That's not necessarily what you aspire to. Very often, people are actually happy to stay and continue develop, the specialty that they're known for, and they might also not make good managers. But what we are doing is actually, for some reason, is we very often think that you need to have that management experience to progress. And with Agile, we flip that around. Almost, where your specialization is as important. It's looked as management is looked as one specialization, but then being a specialist in something else is absolutely valued at the same level, which then helps very much with the autonomy of the teams.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting, I'm going to bank off of that mastery comment as well. When we think of Agile, we talked quite a bit today about business outcomes. And so when we think about these roles and responsibilities, the way the work is defined in Agile is always focused around business outcome and what good looks like. And so for a lot of these roles, it's not about what's the work we have to do and everybody just does the same work over and over again, right? It's not repeating the work. Rather, it's really employing the skill sets and capabilities of individuals to identify what opportunities exist, right? So we don't want to repeat the same work over and over again. We really want to hear new ideas, new opportunities, new solutions. So there's a great emphasis on collaboration. So this really motivates individuals coming into an Agile team to really bring their experience, their flavor, their culture, their background into the mix, which really creates a lot more creative solutions than having to fit a specific model and a specific set of skill sets. So I think it really brings the best of both worlds.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Is there anything that any of you would like to leave the audience with as we wrap up?
Look, I think from my perspective, the one thing that I want you to think is when you embark on an efficiency program or a cost cutting exercise, think about how you can actually not only get people are the biggest cost for many of the organization. Don't think only about how you get rid of people, but how do you actually sustain and take out the work that they do as well, because that will allow you to sustain the benefits and the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Alex. I do believe as you embark on this change, think about what your organization wants to be when it grows up. Think about what good looks like. Take the time up front to really understand what you want to be, what you want to do. It's really important from a senior leadership perspective to have a level of clarity into what the future looks like for your organization. Once you have that in place, agile ways of working will really help in driving change across the organization once that's in place. So really make sure you take the time to set that vision up front.
I agree with what both Alex and Alan have said. I think it's also really important, not when we've mentioned earlier today, not to be agile just for the sake of agile and expect that there'll be cost cutting. It's really important about what are the benefits of agile, and a big part of that is customer at the center, and that naturally leads to both increased revenue and productivity gains. So it's really not just being agile for the sake of it. It's what are the tangible business benefits we want to get, and how are we going to make our life better for our customers.
Great. Once again, thank you to our panelists for joining today.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
And thanks to everyone for joining. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.